Greetings, traveler. As game designers, we always want to come up with new ideas and new games, and the quickest way to find out if they're good is to prototype and test them. However, without having time to do the coding or jump into a game engine or ask our team to develop the prototype for us, it can be difficult to test out if these ideas are good or not. So today, I want to talk about doing the prototype without using any of that. No coding, no game engines. I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept behind this, the mentality. I'm going to talk about the hard mode of trying to prototype and all the pitfalls we can often fall into. And finally, I'm going to give you my easy way of approaching this, both for when designing turn-based games, like more slower-paced games and so on, or when designing action games. My name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now, and I've been making my own games and my own campaigns and ideas basically ever since I can remember. But I didn't always have the coding ability or the time to be able to sit down and make the prototype I had in mind as a video game. What I did have, however, is my knowledge for Dungeons and Dragons and the existing computer games that I already was playing and were installed on my computer. So I wanted to test out all these ideas, but I didn't have the resources to create fully fledged prototypes. And we're not talking about fully fledged games yet. We're just talking about gray box, dead simple graphics, just as a super simple proof of concept to see if what I had in mind was interesting enough to continue development or not. So the hard way of doing this is assuming that basically I need a team to listen to my idea, go and make the thing that I want. They can come back, these 5 or 10 or whatever programmers and artists and so on, and they can present it to me and I can judge if this is indeed good enough or if this is worth continuing further. This is definitely the case for many game development teams out there in the games industry, but I also think it's a bit of a luxury since it assumes that there's going to be an entire team at your disposal, basically, that's going to be paid by someone to simply create prototypes and see if these are fun or not. I'm not saying that this shouldn't be done. I'm just saying that there is an alternative that I discovered that I want to share with you guys today. So when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons way before my professional game developer days, I realized that that system is extremely malleable. And I talk about Dungeons and Dragons a lot, but it doesn't have to be that specific brand or that specific game. Any sort of tabletop, any sort of board game that inspires you can be just as good, right? So what I noticed is that in Dungeons and Dragons, when an ability said it had certain effects, it was very easy for me to say, well, in my world it works differently, or in this game this ability is sealed and instead your character can do something else. It's just words. It's extremely malleable. You could literally come up with whatever you want. So I thought, well, how far can we push this? Could Dungeons and Dragons go way beyond this medieval, magical, fantasy-style combat to do sci-fi, or can it do deep storytelling, or can it do anything else? The answer is, yeah, why not? It has its limitations, but it only has limitations because of the framework it has. And if it's good in one thing, it's going to be bad in another, and so on. And it's up to us as game designers to customize it as we want, to get what we want out of it. And the reason why I mentioned Dungeons and Dragons is because that's where I first started prototyping my own game design. When I had an idea for a new class or a new ability, it was super easy to just play test it with my existing group. And if it didn't work out, that's okay, because we had other content to do at the same time, and I could change it before the next game anyway. So D&D is extremely malleable in that sense, and it kind of opens up your mind to the world of board games as well. And I mentioned this because this is the first type of games that I want to talk about when we're talking about prototyping. So I mentioned there's going to be two categories, turn-based games and action games. So turn-based games are extremely easy to prototype using the whole board game, tabletop game logic, because all you need to do your prototyping is, get ready for this, some paper, some props, and if you want to go super luxurious, dice. That's all you need. If you have some paper, something to use as props like coins or little pieces of wood or plastic or whatever you have left over from your child days, that works. And if you have some dice, if you have the luxury to have like D&D style multi-sided dice, I mean, literally you could express any probability, any kind of randomness that you want. The sky is the limit, really. So where do you go from there? You have the idea for the game you want to make. Perhaps it's a strategy game, perhaps it's another board game, perhaps it's an RPG that has its own complex system of abilities and buffs and debuffs, and people move in turns, and they can only move so many squares per turn. Any sort of game that uses these core mechanics, so grid movement or abilities and combat and different weapons that are expressed in a turn style manner, can easily be adapted to the D&D type of framework. There have been over the years even variations where you don't actually need to use a grid. You can use a distance-based system, and in fact that's what I use when I do my own D&D gaming. I don't use a grid. I instead use a ruler, and say that this one ruler is, let's say, the distance you can move in one turn. So if this ruler can get you where you want to go, then you can move there. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until next turn, and so on. So that system is really extremely malleable, and you can model basically anything you want in it. And that's when you can start prototyping your idea there and seeing if that would be fun to make. So in D&D and similar games, typically you control a single character, but it doesn't have to be a character for your game, right? It could be a unit of many characters. It could be an army. It could be a spaceship. It could be literally anything. But still, you can use the same basic underpinnings of the combat system and the skill system and so on to get you started and say, okay, if we assume that this character was not a human being and he was instead a spaceship that can also only move so much per turn, and it has weapons, and the weapons can only fire from the left side or the right side or whatever, that is extremely easy to model on any tabletop setting. So strategy is a good type of category for this. RPGs are of course a great category to prototype like this. Card games are another big one. Card games famously only need you to have a few pieces of paper, and already you can make your deck and you can write whatever you want on the cards. So a combination of the above is also very interesting. Something like an RPG where every turn you have cards in your hands that dictate what you can do, and maybe you have a deck that you can pick up a new card that you can try every turn. This is similar to, what was that, Metal Gear Acid games that I really enjoyed. So these are super easy things to prototype. You don't need a game engine, you don't need coding. You can just sit down and start making things out of paper, and even use the dice if you want to get fancy about it. But let's move to the action-based games and see how these are different. So by action-based games, I mean something where the player doesn't move in turns. There is no set movement per turn. There is no concept of the turn. There is no active battle time meter, whatever. Basically, the player is free to move as he likes. I'm also going to talk about games like racing games, open environment, open world games where you just travel around and so on. So for these, making things out of paper usually doesn't work so well because when you're testing the game out with another friend, uh, there's the possibility that one might cheat or one moves faster than the other and so on. So what can we do then? Well, let's talk about three specific categories here. Let's talk about a typical FPS kind of game. Let's also talk about racing. And let's also talk about, let's say, exploration. Style games where you just traverse the environment and you just discover what the world has there for you. So let's do FPS first. Let's say that you have your own dream FPS kind of game that you want to make, like Call of Duty or Medal of Honor or Battlefield or any of that stuff, and you just don't have access to this massive budget and gigantic team to build this game for you, but you still want to prototype it to see if it would be fun. Very likely your game has differences from those games that already exist out there in the world. So perhaps you want to limit the arsenal of the player to only specific weapons. Let's say there's a game out there that has 10 weapons, but you only want to have 3 or 4, or you want to make one of these weapons that exist in the game much more powerful than they are right now. Let's say there's a laser pistol in your game that whenever it hits a player, that player just dies immediately. Those kind of situations are actually extremely easy to simulate with existing games in multiplayer matches. So let's say that you log into your favorite FPS and you're just playing with friends, so you can communicate the rules of the game to all your friends, and you can say that, look, we're not allowed to use shotguns or sniper rifles or rocket launchers, but everything else goes. Also, we're not allowed to step on water or something, or if the game stage has water, again, you get to select the game stage, so you can set the layout and you can set the rules and so on. And if you want to increase the effectiveness of something just to see if it would be fun or not, you can say that, look, anybody who gets shot by a pistol shot, for example, or by a flare or by a grenade, they don't just take damage, they have to write something in the chat or say something in the voice chat and say, you know, I got hit, I'm dead. This is basically the same mentality as paintball or survival game, as they call it here in Japan, sabage, or whatever other version it takes in everywhere else around the world. Basically, since the rules of the game are communicated to the other players, then they can play out this game with you, and at the end of the game, because you're playing it with people, you also get to hear their feedback about whether they had fun or what they would like to change and so on. So this immediately turns into a game feedback session as well. Double bonus in this case. So this is my favorite way of prototyping these FPS style games, is you take an existing one, you create the rules, and you just play it with your friends and see how much fun you have with it. Let's move to the next one. So racing games. For racing games, usually I find that games that already have more than one type of vehicle out there are a very good starting place for simulating what you want to do. In this case, I think a GTA kind of game or similar games that just have a lot of actions, lots of vehicles and abilities available in the game is a good starting point to just jump in and decide the vehicle you're going to use, decide the limitations, decide the racing course that you want to do around the game. And of course, the game might be intended for a completely different purpose, right? But that's fine. We don't care about that right now. What we care about is prototyping our idea. So let's say you want to make a motorcycle racing game off-road. That just so happens to be one of the things you can do in a GTA type of game. So, or let's say you want to do a horse racing game. Why not try it out in Red Dead Redemption around a circle or around a building and see what it's like? So this is a very, very quick and easy way to get started and get some really, really fast feedback and iterate extremely fast, since you can change the rules super easy because all you did was come up with them, and then retry it and refine it more and more and more, and basically get to the point where you're having so much fun with this make-believe, very super fast prototype, where you think, you know what, this would be super cool as a game all on its own. And then you can start thinking about whether it's worth your time and the investment to jump into the actual development of that game. But yeah, games like that already include a bunch of vehicles and weapons and abilities and environments are very good for prototyping all sorts of other game ideas, in my experience. And finally, we have exploration here. So for exploration, what I like to test these ideas into is usually space games. And the reason why I choose space games is because of the ability to move in 3D space. Now, perhaps the exploration game you have in mind doesn't need you to move in 3D space, or it's around gravity-based combat, something with like modern fighter jets and so on. So you can, of course, go ahead and pick a game that's closer to what you want to prototype as you see fit. But in my experience, those games really set my mind free because you can travel in all directions. You can travel between planets. Often in space games, you can land on a planet and you can look around its surface. Perhaps there's a structure there that you can also explore. So you can get both the land-based and space-based type of exploration there. And again, the crucial thing here is that you get to say the story that you want, right? So perhaps the game is about, I don't know, facing some alien threat or whatever, but you can go over a level that you have cleared already and create your own objectives there and say that the objective of the player here is to find 10 trash cans. But in your version of the game, trash cans represent, I don't know, super rare earth deposits. So if the player stands next to one for 5 seconds, then they are considered to have mined it and they can move on. So you can just create whatever rules you want. The game level is going to be empty, since assuming you defeated the enemies already there, then there's nothing to be a distraction to the player. And if you don't like the results, you can change the rules and try again basically immediately. So that's another very good way to do it. And as a bonus to all of the ways I said above, there is a happy middle ground to using a game that exists already, but you cannot modify in any way, and the game engines that are completely modifiable in terms of gameplay, but they require more skill to get into. And that is, of course, games that come together with level editors. So this might require some programming or some scripting or some knowledge of that specific tool, but let's not think about that and let's not use that at the moment. Instead, let's use exactly what the game has already. All these level editors usually come up with a sample level or the levels of the actual game already available for you to play with. So before jumping in and understanding all the little features of the level editor and how to code it and how to mod it and how to do all these crazy things, let's just instead stick to taking what's already there and copying and pasting objects around the level. And if you don't want something, try deleting it. So just with removing objects and copying objects at different parts of the level, you can customize the level so much and use what's already there to get you started on the idea that you want to prototype. So again, no need to install anything new. You're just using the existing tools that are there already. I think Neverwinter Nights had a pretty interesting level editor, and you could also create your own campaigns, but I'm sure there's many games out there, perhaps you know more than me, that allow you to basically change the look of the level and the objects of the level with pretty minimal knowledge of additional tools and scripting and so on. Usually you don't even have to go so far. So there you have it. That's my easy way of starting to prototype an idea without having any complicated tools and without needing to spend hours programming before you get your first play session. This is something that I have used a lot in the past with my friends, and it has turned out some really, really cool results for game ideas. And in the cases where it didn't work, it offered really, really good laughs all around the room and some really, really wonky and silly situations to find ourselves into, which of course just leads you to more ideas for more game prototyping exploration. Anyway, please let me know if you know of any games out there that do this particularly well and they let the player be creative and customize the experience to prototype their own ideas. Thank you, as always, for your time, and until next time, have fun.